Hello everyone, this is Mr. Mola for lesson 7-6. So we are factoring ax squared plus bx plus c now. So the only difference between yesterday's lesson and today's lesson is there's going to be a number in front of that x squared. And it doesn't seem like it'll do a whole lot or change a whole lot, but it actually does. Makes it a lot harder than when you're trying to figure out what to put in those parentheses. Again, there's a couple different ways to do it. There's the algebra tile, so I know that there's two x's here, so that what'll give you that, you'll need to know that there's two x squareds, and you know there's a plus 1 over there, and then you know that there's a 2 over there, and then an x there. So if you multiply all those out, you'll get what's inside those parentheses. Kind of the same thing then here. They want you to think of it a length and a width. Otherwise, you can always do the guess and check stuff. So there's two kind of problems on today's homework. One, like 1 through 6, are going to be a lot easier. It might be difficult at first, just because you might not think of it, but problems like 1 through 6, trust me, are going to be a lot easier. So the first thing you should do when you look at a problem and see if there's anything that you can factor out. So that means see if there's anything common between the three numbers there. In number 1, they both have a 2 in them. 2 can go into 2, 2 can go into 14, 2 can go into 36. So what I'm going to do is divide everything by 2. So 2c squared divided by 2 is just c squared. Negative 14c divided by 2 is negative 7c. And then negative 36 divided by 2 is a negative 18. So taking out that 2 really helps. And now we're just looking at this problem, and this is pretty much just a recap of what we did yesterday then. So I need two numbers that multiply to 18, and then when you add them up, negative 18, and then when you add them up, you get negative 7. So a couple different ways we can multiply to 18, but then there's only one way that we can get that adds to negative 7. So we can do like 18 and 1, but that doesn't add to negative 7. 6 and 3, but that doesn't add to negative 7. But if we did negative 9 and positive 2, that multiplies to 18, and that adds to negative 7. So our final answer then is going to be that 2 on the outside, and then c minus 9 and c plus 2 inside parentheses. So very similar to what we did yesterday, except now you're adding that step beforehand of pulling out a greatest common factor. Okay, same thing here. We got 4, we got 8, and we got 140. Okay, so I look, 4 can go into 4, 4 can go into 8, and 4 can go into 140. So I'm going to divide everything by 4. So 4a squared divided by 4 is just a squared. 8a divided by 4 is 2a. And negative 140 divided by 4 is 35. So then kind of the same thing then. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 35. And when I add them, I get positive 2. So really only two ways I can think to multiply to 35. 35 and 1, and that doesn't give us 2 when we add them together. And then 7 and 5. So I'm going to do a plus 7 and a minus 5. So we like it when those numbers, only have one or two ways to get there. All right, we're going to do one more like this, and then we'll get on to a little bit of the harder ones. So again, 3, 6, 24 all have 3 in common. So 3 goes into 3, 3 goes into 6, and 3 goes into 24. So 3x squared divided by 3 is just x squared. Negative 6x divided by 3 is negative 2x. And negative 24 divided by 3 is negative 8. So now same thing, two numbers that multiply to negative 8, but then when you add them together, you get negative 2. Again, there's only two ways that you can get 8, so 8 and 1, but that doesn't equal 2 when you add them together. And then 4 and 2 would be the other one. So a negative 4 plus 2 gives me the negative 2. So again, there's my final answer there. So those would be more of the easy ones. So first step when you're solving on today's homework is to see if any of the numbers have a greatest common factor. Okay, if we slide down to questions like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you'll see none of these have a greatest common factor. There's nothing that goes into 12 that also goes into 37 that also goes into 28. So this is when it's a little tougher, especially with a 12 in the beginning, because you can do 12 a couple different ways. You can do 6 and 2, you can do 4 and 3, you can do 1 and 12. So this is probably a more difficult one to start with because there's lots of different ways to add 12. And the reason this gets more difficult is because now you have to think about which number can you multiply by 12, but also multiply to 28, and then when you add them, get you negative 37. So at least we know here we're going to have two minus signs because a negative times a negative will give us that positive 28, and then we'll need the numbers to add to 37. And really the only way to do these is kind of guess and check. So I know 7 and 4 is 28, and I know 4 and 3 makes 12. So, and this is the only way that it's going to work. If you pick another set of numbers, it's not going to work. So if I do this, that gives me my 12g squared. If I do this, this gives me negative 16g. If I do that, that gives me negative 21g. And if I do that, that gives me a positive 28. And then if I add those together, I get that negative 37g that I'm looking for. So that's pretty much the only way to do it, is kind of do guess and check. So I'll do some guess and check wrong on number 8 here to kind of show you some different ways that you might think of things, and kind of show you what not to do. But unfortunately, the only way to kind of get these is guess and check. Okay, so two numbers that multiply to 6, and then two numbers that multiply by 4, and then when I add those together, I get negative 11. So again, we know the signs will be minus and minus because we have a negative 4, but we don't know the numbers yet. So let's try 6k and just 1k, because that gives me 6. And let's try negative 2 and negative 2, because if I multiply that, I'll get 4. So again, this is not the right answer, and I'll show you how we know it's not the right answer. So 6k and 6k is 6k squared, so it looks good so far. 6k and negative 2 is negative 12k. Negative 2k and negative 2 and 2 and k make negative 2k, and 2 and negative 2 make positive 4. So 6k squared's right, 4 is right, but when I combine these two, I get negative 14k. Well, that's not what the problem asked for. The problem asked for a negative 11k. So we know something is wrong, so something needs to get changed here. Okay. So you try 2 and 2, maybe you try 4 and 1, you switch it, kind of maybe do the math in your head and see what it is. It ends up being the 2 and 2 were wrong, and so were the 6 and the 1. So I'm going to tell you the right answer is 3k minus 4 and 2k minus 1. And again, there's really no magic trick here. It's just going to be a lot of guess and check here. So multiply those, I get negative 8k. Multiply that, I get positive 4. So I end up with my 6k squared. Combine negative 3 and negative 8. That gives me the negative 11 I'm looking for from the problem, and 4. Okay, so again, no magic formula. I can tell you like this will work for every problem, or this is how you do it. With these problems, I kind of do it. There's just a lot of guess and check involved there. Hopefully you get problems like number 10's not so bad, just because you end up with a 2, and 2 is a prime number, so you know it has to be 2 and 1 pretty much. So some problems will probably be easier than others. Some might be a little more difficult. Let's move on to some on this page. Okay, so like number 16 shouldn't be so bad because it starts off with a negative 2. Okay, negative 2, there's not going to be a whole lot of combinations there. And in fact, I'd probably distribute out a negative on these because it's kind of hard to think about what the negative is. So first thing I would do is divide each side by negative 1. So then it ends up changing to 2d squared plus d minus 6. And that usually makes things a little easier if this first number isn't negative. So if you see all these with a negative sign in front, first thing I would do is get rid of that negative. Now I'm thinking of two numbers that multiply to 2. Luckily, there's only one way we can do that. It has to be 2 and 1. And then two numbers that multiply to 6. And then when I simplify those, you end up getting positive 1d. So let me try 3 and 2 here. So 2d and d gives me my 2d squared that I'm looking for. 2d and 2 gives me my 4d. Negative 3 and d gives me negative 3d. And negative 3 and 2 gives me the negative 6. And then when I combine those, I do get the single 1d that I'm looking for. So that's the right answer. So you would put this into big ideas. Except remember, big ideas isn't like the negative 1 out in front. So you would just put in the negative. All right, let's look at one more here with these negatives. Let's look at number 14. So again, first thing I would do is divide everything by that negative 1. So negative 6x squared divided by negative 1 is just 6x squared. positive x divided by negative 1 is a negative x, and positive 15 divided by a negative 15, or negative 1 is a negative 15. So again, get rid of that negative. It really helps. This way you're not having to switch those signs on that first one. So only do that if the first number is negative, like it is on here, 13 through 18. So two numbers that multiply to 6, and then two numbers that multiply to negative 15. And then when you add them together, you get a negative 1x. So let's do 2x. That would make that a 3x. Let's make this a positive 3. Let's make this a negative 5. So again, really just looking to do some guess and checking here. So that gives me 6x squared. That gives me 10x. That gives me a positive 9x. And that gives me a negative 15. Okay, so then you could find those and you do get that negative x that you're looking for. So maybe if you get a number that's too big, you know that you need to lower the numbers in the parentheses somehow, or maybe switch them around. If you get a number that's too small, then you kind of need to make the numbers bigger. So make sure you just get that middle number is going to be the hard number to start getting now.